The observatory loomed like a dead god's cathedral, broken spires jutting into the dusty sky, shattered glass domes hanging like fractured stars above the ruins of Haven 7. Dr. Darren Clove stepped lightly across the warped metal flooring, his boots clicking against the debris-strewn path as he entered the primary corridor. A lingering chemical tang clung to the air fire suppressants, oxidized metal, and the sterile sting of something artificial that never quite faded. His breath echoed behind his helmet visor, even though the suit's filtration systems kept the outside world at bay. It was quiet here. Too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't feel like absence, but instead like something holding its breath. He activated the scanner on his forearm, a pale blue light sweeping out in an arc ahead of him, painting jagged shadows on the walls. Data fragments flickered across his visor, most of them corrupted beyond repair. He moved forward slowly, methodically, scanning alcoves, shattered terminals, and research benches that once held the dreams of an entire civilization's rediscovery. Officially, Darren was here under the authority of the Linguistic Preservation Guild, a cleanup mission. Salvage the Etherian language cores, if any remained. Recover data. Catalog ruins. Unofficially, he was chasing ghosts he'd grown up reading about. The Etherians, an extinct civilization wiped out 3 centuries ago under mysterious circumstances. The whispers of consciousness preservation. The cultural obsession with language as memory. And always that maddening gap in the archives. Something was missing. Something vital. Darren hadn't come to reclaim scraps. He'd come hoping. For a miracle. He passed under the arch of what had once been the upper archive vault, now sagging under the weight of structural damage. Cracks spidered across the curved ceiling like veins. Emergency lighting flickered along the walls in fitful pulses, their rhythm erratic and twitching, as if the building itself was struggling to remember how to be alive. Sublevel 7 access. Darren muttered, shining his scanner over the collapsed elevator shaft. Manual descent, 60 meters. A narrow maintenance ladder led down into darkness, metal rungs slick with condensation. He began his descent carefully, boots braced against the inner wall, scanner tucked away to avoid any accidental drops. The further he went, the colder it got. By the time he reached the base, the air was damp and the floor was covered in thin puddles that reflected the sporadic flicker of the hallway lights. Broken cables dangled like vines from the ceiling. Doors yawned open into rooms filled with water, old paper curling in their corners. Untouched for weeks. Then the scanner beeped, faint, just above baseline. A thermal reading. Darren froze. He adjusted the settings, lowering the sensitivity, then sweeping the corridor again. The reading was faint, irregular, but unmistakably warm, in a dead place. Something alive. He moved toward it, stepping carefully. Every sense sharpened. The ruins didn't feel empty anymore. There was something else here. Not a rescue drone. Not a malfunctioning reactor. This was movement, heat, breath. A low sound broke the silence, a soft scrape. Rhythmic, almost too faint to catch. Organic. He turned to his left, past a collapsed corridor wall, the sound vanishing instantly. Hello? Darren called out, his voice carrying through the ruins like a foreign entity. Silence. He stepped closer to the wall, angling his helmet light into the shadows. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. The scanner still pulsed with that faint signal, holding steady. He called again, softer this time. Is someone there? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pressed against him, heavy, expectant. And in that silence, he felt it. He was not alone. The corridor walls whispered back his every footstep, and the pale scan line from Darren's wrist device lit up the stagnant water pooled along the cracked floor. He edged past the collapsed paneling and ducked beneath a sparking conduit, his hand brushing against a scorch mark he hadn't noticed before. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't just structural decay. The damage was targeted, precise, controlled chaos. The attackers hadn't come to destroy Haven 7, they'd come to erase something, and yet something had survived. The heat signature remained steady behind the fractured archive wall ahead, huddled, deliberately still. Darren approached, unarmed, his scanner dimmed to avoid startling whoever was hiding there. The closer he got, the more the hair on his arms stood up, not from fear, but from some low electric instinct that buzzed beneath his skin. As if the air itself recognized him. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said calmly, crouching low. "My name is Darren Clove. I'm a researcher." No response. Then, ever so slowly, a figure shifted from behind the storage console thin arms. Tangled hair, green-tinted skin streaked with grime. She was young, barely into adulthood by human standards. Her clothes were ragged, stained, likely once a researcher's uniform, now reduced to survival gear. What stopped Darren's breath, though, were the glowing, faintly pulsating markings. Along her neck and collarbones, Etherian. Alive. Impossible. She stared at him, her obsidian black eyes unreadable and wide. Her whole body was tense, coiled like a wire about to snap. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but only a shaky breath escaped. Darren slowly raised both hands, showing her he held no weapon. "I can help you," he said and carefully enunciated. "Common." Then, switching to a reconstructed dialect from ancient Etherian fragments. "I know your tongue. You are not alone." Her head tilted, ever so slightly, her eyes narrowing not in suspicion, but recognition. She replied, and Darren's breath caught. The dialect was Etherian, yes, but older. Raw, not academic. This was a living language, spoken by someone who wasn't supposed to exist. He couldn't translate all of it, but he understood the intent. "Don't hurt me. Don't take me away. I don't want to forget. I won't," he said quietly. "You're safe." She didn't move toward him, but she didn't run. Progress. He extended a ration pack from his side pouch, sliding it across the damp floor toward her. "Food," he said, then added in her dialect, "not poison. Good for you." She snatched it with desperate, bird-like precision, retreating a few steps before inspecting it. She opened the package with movements that were cautious, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She tasted it, and when her markings flared a little brighter, Darren knew it was the first warmth she'd felt in weeks. "Do you have a name?" he asked gently, switching fully to Etherian now, stretching his memory to its limits. She looked up, chewing slowly, her eyes locked on his after a long silence. She said, "I think I used to." He frowned. "You don't remember?" "Not. All of it is mine," she whispered. "Some memories. They belong to others. Before me." Darren blinked. "What do you mean?" "They put them in me," she said, touching her temple. "Their memories, their lives, to keep them alive." The words struck him like a blow. This wasn't just a survivor. She was. A vessel. His pulse quickened. This was Project Continuity, the unconfirmed, ethically controversial program rumored to have existed in Haven 7's deepest levels. The idea that Etherian scientists had tried to preserve their civilization by embedding living memories into new vessels' hosts who would carry the culture forward after the extinction. "Is that what happened to you?" he asked softly. She nodded once, then paused. "You speak our words like you've heard them before." Darren hesitated. "I've studied your language for years, but not that dialect," she said. "Not the way you said it." "What way?" She stared at him for a long moment, then spoke a single phrase. His heart nearly stopped. It was a greeting old, intimate, from the records of a vanished city once spoken by caretakers to their children. not something he had ever learned in his academic studies. But he knew the correct reply, and he spoke it, fluently, instinctively. Her expression cracked, grief and recognition flooding her face all at once. "That phrase," she whispered. "Only." "My mother used to say it." Darren's hands went cold. He hadn't read that in any archive. Her voice trembled. "What is your name?" "Darren," he said. "Darren Clove." She stepped forward slowly, studying him like a ghost returning from memory. "Do you remember my name?" she asked. He didn't know how to answer. He didn't think he did, but something rose, unbidden, from deep within a sound, a syllable. Soft on the tongue. A name. Iria. She froze, her entire body locked in place. The glow of her markings surged into brilliance, then faded. She whispered, "Only my mother called me that." The air between them thickened, charged with something ancient and terrible and beautiful. Iria, if that truly was her name, took a step back, one trembling foot skimming the shallow water. Her eyes locked on Darren, wide and brimming with something not quite fear, not quite hope. Her markings, those soft bioluminescent veins along her throat and arms, flickered erratically like a system struggling to regulate itself. "You said my name," she whispered again, as if testing reality with each syllable. "But how could?" "You know it?" Darren stood frozen. He had no answer, none that made rational sense. The name had surfaced in his mind with the force of memory, not recall. Not academic knowledge. Not something found in an archive, but something lived. Something whispered in moments of tenderness, of loss, of longing. "I don't know how I knew it," he admitted finally, his voice unsteady. "It just came to me." Iria stared at him as though he were a mirror. Then, without warning, her legs gave out and she collapsed to her knees in the water, hugging her arms around herself like she was holding in a scream. Darren rushed forward, stopping just short of touching her. "You're not him," she murmured, shaking her head. "You can't be him, but you have her voice." "Whose voice?" he asked gently, kneeling beside her. "Iria, what's happening to you?" She didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on something far away, something within. "My mother used to call me that name," she said, her voice distant. "She was the only one who ever did. It was our secret. She said it meant light in darkness. She used to whisper it to me during the evacuation. When the world was ending." Darren felt a pressure in his chest. The name Naria formed unbidden in his mind, like an echo from another lifetime. Iria continued. She was part of the Continuity Project. One of the founders. She believed that. Love wasn't a feeling, it was information. It could be stored. Preserved. Passed down. Darren swallowed hard. The consciousness preservation theory. She called it a legacy of emotion, Iria said. Not data. Not language. Emotion. Memories tied to feeling. She thought the deepest truths of a culture weren't in books or machines, but in the emotional bonds we forge. The way a parent sings to a child. The way a name is spoken with meaning. Darren felt dizzy. "You said you carry memories that aren't yours," Iria nodded. "I carry dozens, hundreds, but hers. Hers are the oldest, the strongest. And you," she finally looked at him, "you triggered them." There was a beat of silence between them as understanding began to solidify into something terrifying. "You think I'm a carrier too," Darren said slowly. She nodded. "But I'm human." "How?" "The Continuity Project wasn't limited to our species," she said. "They modified human DNA, subtle changes, epigenetic keys buried in your genome. You wouldn't even know. Not unless you came into contact with someone like me, someone who could unlock the dormant codes." Darren stared at her. "You're saying my knowledge of Etherian language, my affinity for it, was never just talent," she finished. "It was memory, inherited, buried so deep you mistook it for intuition. He sat back, stunned. Every strange moment of his childhood resurfaced with sudden clarity, dreams in languages he had never studied, feelings of déjà vu when handling ancient Etherean artifacts, the unexplainable comfort he felt while reading dead scripts. "How many of us are there?" he asked. "I don't know," Iria said. "The archive here might contain that answer, if it's still functional." She stood slowly, her limbs shaking with exhaustion. Darren supported her without hesitation. "We need to go," she said. "There are people groups who want to prevent this technology from surfacing again. They think consciousness preservation is a threat to the natural order." Darren glanced around the ruined chamber. "You think that's why Haven 7 was destroyed?" "I know it was," she whispered. "They weren't trying to destroy data. They were trying to erase us." He steadied her. "Then we'll find the archive. We'll uncover the truth." As they turned to leave the flooded hall, the lights in the ceiling above flickered, not in failure, but in sequence. A pattern. One that pulsed outward, deeper into the complex. The facility was waking up. Not randomly. It was responding to them. To both of them. Somewhere in the bowels of Haven 7, ancient systems were sensing something long awaited, two carriers in proximity. Two halves of a key, and the door was about to open. The corridor ahead unfurled like a throat, swallowing them whole, tight, metal, breathing stale, recycled air. Lights embedded in the ceiling came alive as Darren and Iria moved forward, their footfalls echoing off rusted bulkheads and shattered glass panels. A low hum pulsed through the walls, steady, sentient. It wasn't power being restored. It was attention, recognition. Haven 7 wasn't just reactivating. It was watching them. They reached the lower archive wing. Sublevel Theta, an area Darren had only seen referenced once in a buried directory flagged under experimental protocol. Continuity Prime. The entrance had once been sealed behind biometric locks. Now it was wide open. The reinforced blast doors retracted into the walls like parted lips. The air inside was warmer, charged, like the space was expecting a reunion. Darren hesitated at the threshold. "This place feels wrong," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Iria corrected. "Not wrong. Alive." They stepped inside. Walls made of obsidian-tinted composite stretched upward in arched vaults. Holographic glyphs flickered along the curvature of the ceiling, Etherean script scrolling automatically, reacting to their presence. Darren's scanner vibrated in his hand before shutting off entirely, overwhelmed. The room at the center, the core archive, was circular and tiered like an amphitheater. At its center stood a cylindrical tower, its surface etched with thousands of interwoven names in glowing Etherean calligraphy. Names that pulsed softly as Iria approached. "They're not just data points," she said. "They're preserved. People, fragments, emotional echoes waiting for resonance." Darren walked around the structure slowly. Each name felt familiar, not as if he had read them before, but as if he had heard them whispered in dreams. Then he saw it, etched into the middle column, glowing brighter than the rest. Naria Clavin, Keeper of Light, Continuity Architect, Mother to Iria. His breath caught. "She's real." Iria touched the name, her hand trembling. She was always real. Something deep inside Darren cracked open, a pressure behind his eyes blooming into a wave of sensation. He saw a domed sanctuary collapsing in fire. He smelled lavender incense burned during ritual farewell songs. He heard a lullaby in a voice not his own, a melody meant to soothe a crying child. The tears came before he realized they were his. "I remember her," he said, gasping. "I remember her, not from stories, not from books, from the inside, her hopes, her fear, her last moments before." Iria nodded slowly. "Then it's true." You're her carrier." He sank to the floor, gripping the metal grating beneath him as the flood of memories slowed to a drip. It wasn't just language he had inherited. It was love, grief, determination forged in extinction's shadow, and a name, a single, sacred name that had passed from mother to child across centuries of silence. "I'm sorry," Iria whispered, kneeling beside him. "This must feel like being invaded." "No," Darren said, shaking his head. "It feels like coming home." The moment held, suspended in time, until a chime rang through the archive chamber. A holographic console blinked to life, displaying a branching neural map, a living web of consciousness carriers. Hundreds, maybe thousands, species of all kinds, some dormant, some flickering awake. "What is that?" Darren asked. Iria's eyes widened. "The continuity network. The people. Like us." The map expanded, showing link nodes, each one a potential carrier, names, coordinates, genetic markers. One name blinked red. Zarek's Blackfield, active termination order log. Darren stepped forward. "They're hunting others." Iria's markings dimmed. "They know the carriers are activating, and they're trying to erase them before the network stabilizes." "Then we don't have time," Darren said. "We have to warn them." He accessed the interface instinctively, as if the system had trained him in a dream. The console accepted his input without hesitation. Glyphs translated into commands beneath his hands, but as he reached toward a sequence marked "Initiate Broadcast Uplink," the console froze. A new symbol appeared. "Key confirmation required. Secret NAM EYRAA." Darren blinked, heart hammering. "It's asking for your name." "I gave it to you," she said quietly. "You already know it." His hand hovered over the confirmation input, and he spoke it again. Not in common, not in Etherian standard, but in the secret dialect so old it predated the archives themselves, Iria. The console unlocked. Streams of code surged across the chamber, lights activating in sequence like a pulse from a sleeping heart now stirred. Doors opened. Systems aligned. The continuity network had begun to awaken, but far above, in Haven 7's surface-level relay towers, something else stirred. An alert was sent. Proximity confirmed. Carrier pair activated. Phase interference ENACTD from orbit. A dormant drone cloaked, silent, armed came to life. Darren looked up as the ceiling groaned. "Something's coming," he whispered. Iria stepped beside him, her voice steady now. "Then let it come." They stood together at the center of the awakened archive carrier, an echo, memory and legacy ready to defy extinction with love encoded in the stars. The tremor rolled through the floor like a pulse from something vast and ancient awakening below. The lights above Darren and Iria flickered, then held steady, brighter than before, casting sharp reflections off the flooded metal floor. Somewhere, high above, the sound of collapsing stone and warped bulkheads rumbled like distant thunder. The facility was no longer dormant. It was defiant. But they were no longer alone. Darren gripped the edge of the console as warning glyphs rippled across the holographic interface. Phase interference detected. External hostile system initiated. Defensive protocols offline. Manual override required. "They found us," Iria said, her voice low, already bracing herself against the shift in air pressure. "And they're not coming to talk. Who are they exactly?" Darren asked, stepping back from the console, sweat beating at his temple. "Not a single faction," Iria answered, turning toward the vault's primary exit as a new siren began to shriek through the observatory's lower levels. "There. A coalition of fear. Governments, corporate syndicates, even rogue scientific enclaves. Anyone terrified of what consciousness preservation truly means. You said they were trying to erase the evidence. Darren said, heart pounding. But this feels like a surgical strike. It is, she said, her expression grim. We've just confirmed that continuity didn't fail. We proved it worked. Now they'll do anything to stop the rest of the galaxy from finding out. A violent burst of static tore through Darren's CUM interface. Then a voice, distorted and synthetic, bled through. Unregistered personnel detected. This facility is under decontamination lockdown. Remain in place for termination. Oh, that's comforting. Darren muttered from the far corridor, a concussive. Thum sounded, followed by another. Rhythmic, mechanical, something walking with weight and purpose. The sound of advanced exo-armor or something worse. Escape route? He asked quickly. Iria glanced at a flickering wall schematic. Sublevel 9, maintenance tunnels. Leads to the geothermal shaft. It might still be open if the collapse didn't seal it. And if it did? We improvise. Darren pulled a memory core from the active console, locking in the neural map and the partial carrier registry. We can't let them get this, he said, slipping the core into a magnetic sheath on his belt. Even if we don't make it. Out this has to survive. Iria nodded once, solemn and fierce. Then let's move. They dashed through the corridor, the overhead lights blinking faster now, as if syncing with the approaching enemy's pace. Behind them, the vault door shuttered. A heat signature spike lit up Darren's scanner. They're breaching, he shouted. No time. Iria veered left into a narrow descending shaft. It stank of coolant and stale air. Rats or something. Were scattered in the shadows. As they descended into the maintenance tunnel, Darren's mind spun. His memories, not just his, clashed like waves in a storm. He saw flashes of Naria's final moments, of her desperate coding efforts, of her humming a lullaby as fire consumed the outer cities of Hull. He saw Iria small, crying, bundled in. A stasis pod she didn't remember. He saw himself, or perhaps someone through him, placing that pod in an escape chamber and whispering a name with reverence. Iria. Did you say something? She asked, glancing over her shoulder. I think I remember putting you in that pod, Darren said, breathless. But that wasn't me. Was it? Iria slowed. Her expression turned glassy. That was Thurin, she whispered. My father. Darren stopped. I'm carrying him too? Not all of him, she said, stepping close, the tunnel light illuminating her tear-bright eyes. But enough to remember. Outside, an explosion rattled the walls. Then, a hiss of gas, the unmistakable release of thermite charges. They were breaching room by room. Darren grabbed Iria's hand. Come on, we're out of time. They burst into the geothermal intake chamber, the heat oppressive and the control. Systems barely functional. A retractable vent shaft led straight up to the collapsed surface, too narrow for armored units, but just enough for a climb. Iria climbed first, her strength returning with every motion. Her body remembering survival like it was in her DNA. Darren followed, heart thudding, memory core pressing against his side like the weight of a dying civilization. Below them, a dark shape entered the chamber. A Hunter-class drone. Its optics scanned upward, locking on. Its targeting sequence began to hum. Darren kicked the manual release on a coolant vent. Steam burst upward in a torrent, clouding the shaft. They scrambled the final meters in silence, emerging into a shattered surface plane soaked in low red light. Dawn or firelight, it was impossible to tell. The shuttle pad was nothing but ruins, but the backup beacon array still stood. Darren fell to his knees, activating the uplink. Iria knelt beside him, breathless, glowing softly. They'll follow us. I know, he said. But now the galaxy will hear us first. He pressed send. The continuity signal fired skyward, bouncing off every relay still intact. Writing old Aetherian. Quantum codes into the void, warning the carriers, calling them home. And in the shadows of Haven 7, the enemy realized it was already too late. The signal raced through the void. Encoded in the ancient Etherian frequency band, it slipped between satellite debris and dormant relay buoys, awakened jump relays untouched in centuries, and bounced from deep space listening posts to long forgotten outposts on the fringe of known space. Everywhere it went, it whispered a single truth: continuity lives. Somewhere on a refugee barge orbiting a decaying gas giant, a child blinked and began speaking in a language no one aboard had ever taught her. On a research moon beneath an ice-covered ocean, a biologist paused mid-experiment as memories not his own flooded his mind, memories of a crystalline city that had never existed on his world. Across the stars, they stirred. But on Haven 7, chaos had only just begun. Aria and Darren staggered away from the collapsed shuttle pad, their lungs burning, every muscle aching from the climb and sprint through the geothermal vent shaft. The continuity archive below had gone dark again, self-sealed with a timed encryption lock Darren had barely managed to activate before their escape. But the enemy had already breached the facility. That drone hadn't come alone. They didn't have much time. We need to disappear, Iria said, crouching low behind a collapsed antenna dish. Her eyes scanned the ruins of the outer ring. There will be more. Ground teams. Kill squads. Human or not, it won't matter. They'll destroy anyone that can't be controlled. They've already tried, Darren replied, checking the charge on his sidearm. But now the signal's out. They can't contain this anymore. Iria shook her head. They can still try. And you haven't seen what they're willing to use when they're desperate. A shadow passed overhead. Darren looked up, and his blood ran cold. A stealth transport, sleek, black, coated with distortion shielding, lowered silently through the upper atmosphere. It bore no insignia, no nation, no known corporation, but Darren recognized the model. Curran Systems R9, black site grade. Psychological Recovery Division. You were right, he whispered. They're not here to destroy us. They want to take U.S. A sharp tone pierced the air. A column of violet energy slammed into the ground 50 meters from their position, creating a containment wall. A second followed, then a third, each one closing the perimeter tighter, shrinking the world around them like a tightening noose. We need cover, Iria said. Now. Darren spotted it, a half-buried grav skiff on the edge of a collapsed dome. It was covered in debris, but its frame looked intact. Without another word, they sprinted. Another blast hit behind them. The shockwave lifted Darren off his feet and hurled him into the side of the skiff. His vision blurred. Blood filled his mouth. Iria yanked him up. Inside, now, they crashed into the shattered cockpit. The console was fried. Panels hung loose like bones snapped from their sockets. But buried beneath the side panel was something miraculous, an auxiliary control core self-contained, and low-tech enough that the attacker's EMP pulses hadn't fried it. I can get it flying, Darren said, coughing. But not for long. Maybe 3 minutes of lift. Then get us to the ridgeline, Iria said. We disappear into the valley. That's our shot. Outside, a shape approached 7 feet tall, wrapped in adaptive camouflage plating, moving with purpose. Not a drone, a human, or what was once one, a retrieval operative, brain interface controlled, emotion suppressed, eyes hollow from memory erasure. Don't look at it, Iria whispered, working the panel with trembling hands. They erase everything. In others because they lost everything in themselves. The skiff roared to life, choking, sparking, but airborne. Darren pulled the nose up and slammed the throttle. The retrieval agent sprinted. So did the skiff. They cleared the containment walls with inches to spare as plasma fire tore past them. Ridge came fast. Darren pulled them hard over the crest. And the skiff hit the valley floor and skidded into a patch of dense infrared masking moss. The engines died. Silence. Stay low, Iria whispered, grabbing a signal scrambler from the rear storage bin. We'll cloak our heat signatures. Wait out the sweeps. They lay in the skiff's shadows, pressed together, breathing as one. Then something strange happened. Darren felt his thoughts not as his own, but layered, folded, interwoven like dreams nested within dreams. Iria flinched, gasped, and turned to him with glowing eyes. You feel it too, she said. He nodded. It's not just memory now, it's connection. Our minds are synchronizing. She looked shaken. That shouldn't be possible. I think, Darren said slowly, it's what continuity was always meant to become. Not just preservation integration. What are we becoming? She asked before he could answer. A light shimmered through the valley fog. A beacon projected from the core. He carried on his belt, but it wasn't sending it was responding. Glyphs. Flickered in the air. Names. Coordinates. Other carriers. Not just dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands. A network was forming. Carriers around the galaxy were awakening in response to Darren and Iria's proximity, resonating not just with their own fragments, but with each other. They weren't just connected. They were reconstructing. Memory, language, emotion, culture, Etherian. Civilization wasn't being remembered. It was being reborn. And the enemy knew it. They're going to hit us with everything, Iria said quietly. Darren looked at her and felt not just understanding, but inheritance. I know, he replied. But for the first time in centuries, we're not alone. The light above the ridge broke through the clouds like the opening of a scar, harsh, metallic, and deliberate. The enemy wasn't just deploying drones now. They had called down something older, something forbidden. From the sky descended a shape that did not belong in any known fleet registry, an obsidian black obelisk, hovering silently, its surface rippling with shifting patterns of circuitry and bone-white glyphs. It pulsed once, and every system in the ruined valley groaned. In response, even the skiff's dead console lit up momentarily with garbled characters before collapsing into static. Iria's breath caught. They brought a neural extractor. Darren turned slowly, eyes wide. That's not real. That's conspiracy. Tech. The kind of thing buried in black site myths. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's real. It was originally Etherian, a failed continuity prototype, designed to forcibly pull memories from unwilling carriers. They salvaged it, rebuilt it, and now they're using it to erase what they fear. A mechanical shriek echoed across the valley as the extractor's beam swept the terrain, scanning for signatures of stored memory. It wasn't here to kill them. It was here to harvest them. Darren reached for the core on his belt, his fingers trembling. If they take this, every awakened carrier could be traced, tracked, erased. We have to destroy it. No, Iria said, her markings pulsing rapidly. We do something worse. We set it free. He turned to her, startled. What? The archive before we fled, I unlocked more than just the network registry. I opened the core seed of the original continuity algorithm. It can't just store memory. It can spread it, infect systems, reformat consciousness matrices with encoded cultural resonance. If we transmit that to the extractor, it'll absorb it like a virus. Darren stared at her. You're saying? Turn their weapon into a carrier. I'm saying we make it remember, she said. We give it everything, our language, our grief, our love, our extinction. We let the machine feel. Darren hesitated for only a moment. Then he handed her the memory core. The glyphs on the extractor shifted as it neared, its beam narrowing. On their hiding spot, Iria whispered ancient phrases in Etherian, her fingers dancing over the core's interface. The final key was not a code, but an emotion. She closed her eyes. "Hope," she whispered. The core lit up and transmitted. A blinding pulse of data tore through the air, slamming into the extractor. It recoiled, shuddered. Its hovering form lurched erratically, and for the first time, the invincible machine screamed. But it wasn't a mechanical screech. It was human. The extractor buckled in midair as centuries of preserved grief, joy, love, and sacrifice flooded its circuitry. Lights burst from its frame, patterns collapsing and reforming into the flowing glyphs of the Etherian soul language. It tried to resist, but you cannot unlearn sorrow. You cannot undo empathy once it has roots. The obelisk froze in the air, then dropped silently into the dust. A soft hum echoed outward. Then silence. Iria stood slowly. It felt everything. Darren didn't speak. The fog began to lift out far above them. Thousands of continuity nodes across the galaxy responded. In refugee ships, in research outposts, in mines long dormant. The seed had bloomed. One by one. Consciousness carriers awakened. No longer fragments. They were becoming whole, and the galactic powers that had hidden in their fortresses of control and fear now felt the tremor ripple through their foundations. Memory was no longer passive. It had become a force. Days passed. Then weeks. Darren and Iria found shelter in the ruins of an old outpost built by early terraformers. With a salvaged beacon, they reached out not to governments, but to people like them. Others began to arrive: scientists, children, soldiers, traders, all with that same quiet flicker in their eyes, memories not their own, words they shouldn't know, emotions they couldn't explain. And Iria, no longer alone, began to change. Her voice strengthened. Her identity, once frayed by the weight of borrowed lives, began to coalesce. She was no longer just a vessel. She was Iria, daughter of Naria, survivor of Hall, beacon of continuity. And Darren, he remembered now with clarity. He remembered Naria, holding her daughter in the cradle of a collapsing city. He remembered Theron's hand on a launch console. He remembered love, not as something lost, but as something preserved in him. One evening, as the twin moons rose above the plateau, Iria sat beside him on the ridge. "I used to think continuity was about remembering what we lost," she said. "Now?" he asked. She looked at him, her expression calm and eternal. "Now I think it's about remembering who we still are." In the sky above, a new signal pulsed, a star map connecting dots, not just memory, not just history, a living civilization one. That could not be erased because it did not live in cities or bloodlines. It lived in connection. In Darren. And Yria. And all those who chose to remember.